The stars above
Hold still.
Colorado
This
did
will
not
hurt.
care about history.
What are
They
you
had
doing?
watched
Saving your
empires
life, almost
rise and
done.
collapse long before
Hold still.
humanity
This will
learned to
hurt.
look up at them.
What
They
are you
had burned
doing?
through the
Saving
birth
your
of
life.
civilizations and the silence of their endings. They did not quicken when the first alien vessel entered Earth's atmosphere 17 years ago. They did not pause when the treaties were signed, when the borders were drawn, when the careful and terrifying business of interstellar diplomacy began remaking the world below. But the people inside Apex Station cared very much. They had been preparing for 6 weeks. Every quarter had been scrubbed and rescrubbed. Every lighting panel had been calibrated to specifications transmitted by the Aurelian Diplomatic Office, adjusted to wavelengths that complemented rather than offended alien visual biology. Every food synthesis unit had been reprogrammed. Every security protocol had been reviewed, reviewed again, and then reviewed one final time by a team that had not slept properly in 11 days. Queen Cassandra Vale was coming, and the station felt it the way a body feels a storm before the rain arrives. In the tension of shoulders, in the too careful movements of people who were pretending they were not afraid. Declan Merritt was not pretending anything. He was lying on his back beneath a secondary coolant conduit on level 4, with a diagnostic tool in one hand and a half-eaten protein bar in the other, doing exactly what he had done every morning for the past 5 years. Finding the things that were about to break before they broke. It was not glamorous work. It was not the kind of work that made it into any official record or ceremony. But Declan had learned long ago that glamour was just another word for distraction, and distraction was how people died on orbital stations. He was 42 years old. He had worked emergency systems engineering for 19 of those years, the last 5 of them here at Apex Station, 400 kilometers above the Colorado Rockies. He had thick hands and a methodical mind and a quiet about him that came not from shyness, but from a man who had spent too many years listening to systems speak in frequencies most people could not hear. He finished the protein bar. He did not finish the diagnostic. Something in the conduit's pressure reading was off by a fraction that no automated system had flagged, and a fraction today became a rupture next week. And a rupture next week on a station hosting the most powerful alien monarch in the known galaxy became something that did not bear thinking about. He adjusted the calibration. He moved on to the next junction. Above him, the station continued its controlled panic. Station. Commander Brixton Hartwell stood at the center of the Apex Station command deck with the expression of a person who had made peace with the fact that the next 48 hours might simply kill her. Not through any physical threat, through the relentless accumulation of things that needed her attention simultaneously. She was 51 years old with close-cropped silver hair and the posture of someone who had stood in difficult rooms for a very long time and refused to let any of them fold her. She had commanded 3 stations before Apex. She had overseen 17 first-contact diplomatic events. She had, on 2 separate occasions, talked species out of orbital bombardments through nothing but patience and precise language. None of that made today feel manageable. Security sweep on Dock 7 is complete, her operations officer reported from across the deck. Aurelian advance team has cleared the environmental systems for the Queen's Walkway. They want a second sweep before docking. Then give them a second sweep. That's the 4th sweep, Commander. Then give them the 4th sweep and don't tell me about the 5th. She moved to the viewport and looked out at the empty docking approach. The stars beyond were cold and absolute. Where is the royal vessel? 11 minutes out, decelerating on approach vector. Brixton nodded. She had read every file available on Queen Cassandra Vale. She had read the diplomatic histories, the intelligence assessments, the cultural profiles prepared by 17 different agencies across 4 governments. She had read the personal accounts of every human diplomat who had stood in the Queen's presence and survived the experience with their composure intact, which was not a large number. What she understood, distilling all of it down to its essential truth, was this. Cassandra Vale did not make mistakes. She did not tolerate them in others. She had ruled the Aurelian Empire for 23 years, with a precision that the galaxy had come to regard less as leadership and more as a natural phenomenon, like gravity or the expansion of light. Empires that had challenged her had not been destroyed so much as quietly corrected, their mistakes made visible, their futures redirected by a woman who understood that the most effective power was the kind that never needed to announce itself. She was coming to Apex Station because she had chosen to come, And whatever that choice meant, it was not casual. Brixton did not know why. That bothered her more than anything else. In the medical bay on level 6, Princess Sarah Vale sat very still and looked out the window at the approaching darkness of space. She was 20 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, but not her mother's stillness. Where Cassandra was carved from something that had learned to be patient over millennia, Sarah moved through the world with the restless energy of a person who had too many thoughts and not enough time to follow all of them. She was curious in a way that made her advisors nervous. She asked questions that did not fit neatly into protocol. She had, 6 months ago, opened a private communication channel with a consortium of human medical researchers in the Colorado Colony Network and begun discussing, in careful and unofficial terms, the possibility of a humanitarian medical exchange program between Aurelian biological sciences and human colony health infrastructure. This was not something her mother knew about, or so Sarah believed. She looked at the blue curve of Earth below the station and felt something move in her chest that she did not have an Aurelian word for. It was not sentiment exactly, it was more like recognition. The sense of standing at the edge of something that mattered and knowing that you were the only one who could see its full shape. She hoped she was right. She was trying very hard not to think about what would happen if she was wrong. The Aurelian royal vessel arrived at 0847 station time. It was unlike anything human engineering had produced. It did not look built so much as cultivated, its hull a living composite of materials that shifted color in response to atmospheric pressure and electromagnetic fields, currently reading as a deep iridescent blue against the black of space. It was larger than 3 of Apex Station's docking wings combined, and it moved with the absolute unhurried authority of something that had never once needed to hurry. The station's automated systems logged its arrival. The security teams took their positions. The diplomatic staff arranged themselves in the precise formation that had been rehearsed 14 times over the previous 2 weeks. And deep in level 4, Declan Merritt's diagnostic tool vibrated once. He looked at it. Unauthorized energy fluctuation detected. Dock 7, secondary grid, subsection J4. He frowned. That was not possible. Dock 7 was running under maximum security protocols. Its systems had been swept 4 times by Aurelian technology that made human scanning equipment look like something a child had assembled from spare parts. Nothing unauthorized was getting through that net. He checked the reading again. It spiked, then spiked again. Something in Declan's chest responded to that signature in a way that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with 5 years of listening to systems speak in the language of pressure and heat and imminent failure. He knew the signature, not from any alien system, from his own work. The harmonic of overloaded junction nodes in the secondary power grid was something he had mapped himself in his first year on the station when he had rebuilt that entire subsection from the original schematics upward. He had spent 19 months creating a system language that existed nowhere else in the galaxy, and what he was reading now was written in it. He was already moving before he made the conscious decision to move. He took the maintenance corridor. It was faster than the main passage, and it bypassed 3 security checkpoints that would have stopped him cold. He did not think about the checkpoints he was about to violate. He thought about the spike, about its frequency, about what that frequency meant when it reached a certain amplitude in a sealed environment containing compressed plasma conduits and the atmospheric processors for an entire docking wing. He came through the access hatch into the upper maintenance level of Dock 7 at a run. Below him, through the reinforced observation grid, he could see the ceremony beginning, the royal vessel's boarding ramp extending, the Aurelian guards forming their ceremonial lines, their armor catching the dock's light in patterns that moved like something alive. The station's diplomatic staff standing in careful formation at the base of the approach corridor. And then Queen Cassandra Vale emerged, even from this distance, even through the observation grid, even in the middle of everything his training was screaming at him about the energy signature beneath his feet. Declan stopped for 1/2 second. She was tall. That was the first thing, taller than any human in the dock below her, and she moved with an economy that suggested every action had been considered and found necessary before it was taken. She wore no ceremonial armor. Her robes were dark, almost black, with a depth to them that suggested color rather than displaying it. She needed no armor. She needed no display of power. She was the display. The galaxy already knew what she was. Behind her, Princess Sarah descended the ramp. Younger, lighter in her movements, her eyes moving across the dock with the brightness of someone who was seeing the world and finding it larger and more interesting than expected. Declan's diagnostic tool screamed. Critical overload imminent. Secondary grid J4, Dock 7. He looked down through the observation grid. His mind, running the schematics he had lived with for 5 years, found the location instantly. Subsection J4 of the secondary power grid sat directly beneath the docking approach corridor. Specifically, it sat beneath the section that the diplomatic briefings had designated as the princess's approach path, separated from the queen's path by the ceremonial division the Aurelian advance team had specified. Not under the queen's path, under the princess's. The thought arrived with a clarity that was almost cold. This was not an accident. This was not a system failure. This was placed, calculated, built by someone who had read the approach protocols, understood the dock's power architecture, and chosen a location that would go undetected until it was far too late. He was already gone from the observation level before the thought finished forming. The explosion hit at 0903 station time. The sound came first. A compression wave that had no business existing in a pressurized docking environment. A sound that rewrote the acoustic landscape of the entire wing in a single instant. Then the light, white at its core, transitioning outward through orange and black as the secondary grid's plasma conduits contributed their stored energy to an event they had never been designed to participate in. The boarding ramp collapsed inward. A section of the approach corridor's deck plating separated from its moorings and dropped, taking a portion of the structural support framework with it. Aurelian guards were thrown sideways by the pressure wave, their ceremonial formation dissolved into individuals simply trying to maintain contact with any solid surface. Declan hit the dock floor at a full run and felt the secondary blast wave arrive a half-second later, taking him off his feet and depositing him against a structural support column with a force that sent white light across his vision and a sound through his ears that made the explosion seem quiet by comparison. He did not stop. He could not feel his left shoulder. He noted this the way a man in the middle of something notes information that is relevant but not immediately actionable. He pushed himself upright, found his feet, and oriented himself through the smoke. Sarah, she was there. He could see her through the debris field, through the rolling chemical smoke from the plasma conduit discharge, through the heat that was making the air above the collapsed deck section waver and dance. She was trapped. A section of the ramp's support framework had come down across the corridor at an angle that had partially shielded her from the worst of the blast, but had then settled on top of her with the unhurried permanence of several hundred kilograms of alien alloy finding its natural resting place. Her eyes were open. She was conscious. She was looking at him with an expression that was not panic, because she was her mother's daughter, but contained everything that panic would have been in someone with less discipline. The Aurelian guards were moving, but they were moving toward the queen first, which was protocol, which was correct, which was what every procedure ever written about this exact scenario demanded of them. Declan moved toward the princess. The heat was extraordinary. The atmosphere processors for this section of the dock were compromised, and the plasma discharge was reacting with the atmospheric mixture in ways that were producing temperatures along the deck plating that had no business existing in a breathable environment. He felt his work jacket begin to blister at the forearms. He kept moving. He reached the collapsed framework and understood, in the direct and practical way of a man who had spent 19 years understanding the structural behavior of things that had broken, exactly what needed to happen. He got his hands under the primary support member. The metal was hot enough that he felt it before he touched it, felt the heat radiating through the air as a physical presence. He gripped it anyway. "Don't move," he said to her. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "The secondary supports are load-bearing. If you shift before I lift, the whole thing settles differently. Give me 3 seconds." She looked at him, processing, deciding. She held still. He lifted. The pain in his left shoulder arrived with the full force of whatever had happened to it in the initial blast. A pain of a serious and specific character that his body registered and his mind filed under, not yet. The support member moved, not cleanly, not easily. But it moved because Declan Merritt had spent 5 years on Apex Station and knew exactly which angle of force would compromise the remaining structural integrity fastest. And he applied it with the focused desperation of a man who had decided that this was going to work. The framework shifted. Sarah pulled herself clear. The alarms changed pitch. Something deeper in the dock's power infrastructure was failing. The cascade effect of the initial detonation working its way through systems that were not designed to absorb this kind of sequential damage. The sound of it was one Declan recognized from the worst incident of his career. 3 years ago, a reactor seal failure in the station's lower maintenance section that had given him exactly this kind of warning before it resolved itself into something that required 6 months of reconstruction and rewired several of his responses to loud noises permanently. He wrapped his body around Sarah's and put the structural column between them and the failing system. The second detonation was smaller than the first. It was still more than sufficient. The heat was absolute. The darkness that followed was complete. When Declan Merritt became aware of anything again, the first thing he noticed was the silence, not real silence. The station was not silent. He could hear from a great distance that his ears were translating as greater than it probably was, the sounds of emergency response activity, of medical systems, of voices in languages he mostly did not speak, giving instructions he could not follow. But underneath all of that was the silence of a dock that had been full of ceremony and tension and the energy of history in the making, and was now something else entirely. He was horizontal. The surface beneath him was soft and warm, and definitely not the dock floor. The light was different, softer. He opened his eyes and found a ceiling of living crystal, its surface carrying slow pulses of bioluminescent light that moved in patterns suggesting something between organic and designed. He was aboard the royal vessel. He lay still for a moment and took inventory. His left shoulder was conducting a sustained argument about its own damage that he was not going to be able to ignore for much longer. His hands were wrapped in something translucent that pulsed gently in a way suggesting medical, rather than restraint. His ribs were providing a counterpoint to the shoulder's argument. Everything else was present and more or less functional. He turned his head. There were two of them, standing at the far edge of the chamber, separated from him by perhaps 4 meters of space that felt considerably larger under the weight of their attention. Sarah was unhurt, or unhurt enough to be standing, which, given what they had both just experienced, was a category of its own. She was watching him with an expression he could not read from this distance and this angle, but which had a weight to it that he felt across the room. Cassandra Vale was watching him with no expression at all. This was more frightening than any expression would have been. She was closer to his height than he had expected, having seen her from above and at a distance. She was not as he had imagined her from the files, and she was exactly as the files had described. The precision of her was not physical. It was not in the quality of her features or the bearing of her posture, though both of these were remarkable. The precision was in her attention, the absolute undeflectable quality of the way she was looking at him, as if she had not simply decided to look at him but had determined that looking at him was the single most important thing currently happening in the universe and had arranged her complete resources toward this end. He sat up, slowly because his body had opinions about this. He did not look away from her. A voice spoke from somewhere to his right. "He survives." Another voice answered, colder, measured. Queen Cassandra Vale stepped forward. Queen Cassandra Vale stepped forward. One step, enough to make the distance between them something different. "You are the human," she said. "The engineer." Not a question, a confirmation of information already obtained. "Declan Merritt," he said, "level 4 maintenance. I've been stationed here 5 years." She was quiet for a moment. The bioluminescent ceiling continued its slow pulse above them. "You ran toward the detonation," she said. "I detected the anomaly before it fired. I was already moving." "You detected it?" Her voice carried something careful in the word, as if she were testing its weight. "Our advanced team ran 4 security sweeps of that dock. Our equipment is several generations beyond anything currently available to this station's systems. Our people detected nothing." "Your people didn't build the secondary power grid," Declan said. "I did. I know what it sounds like when something in subsection J4 is carrying a load it wasn't designed for. I've known that sound for 5 years." Another silence. Longer this time. Sarah spoke. He covered me, she said. When the second detonation came, he had already pulled me clear. He could have run. He put himself between me and the blast. The Queen's attention did not move from Declan's face. But something shifted in it, a quality change, impossible to name precisely. The way the light changes on a still surface when something moves beneath the water. We have reviewed the dock's recording systems, the Queen said. The detonation device was positioned in the secondary power grid. Subsection J4. She paused. It was positioned beneath the approach path designated for my daughter, not mine. Declan said nothing. He had already understood this in the dock. He did not need to say so. The positioning indicates detailed knowledge of today's approach protocols, Cassandra continued. Protocols that were finalized and transmitted to the station at 0200 station time. Knowledge of the dock's power architecture sufficient to identify the precise location of maximum structural vulnerability beneath that specific path. She let the next words arrive with the full weight of their implication. And the detonation code itself was written in a technical framework that our analysts have identified in the last 11 minutes. She reached to the attendant at her side and accepted a device that projected a small hologram. Declan recognized it immediately. His own work. The system architecture notation he had developed in his first year on Apex Station. The framework he had built to manage the junction monitoring for the secondary grid. 19 months of work, developed from first principles, documented in a system language that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Someone had used his own code to build the bomb. You designed this framework, Cassandra said. Yes. The detonation device was built using it. Yes. Which means either you built this device, she said, or someone with access to your work built it and wanted us to find your signature when we looked. The chamber was very quiet. Declan looked at the hologram of his own work projected between them. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked back at the Queen. I found the anomaly, he said, before it fired. If I had built it, I would have known the timing. I wouldn't have run toward it. Or, Cassandra said, with the precision of someone who has considered every angle before presenting any of them, you built it, lost control of the timing, and ran toward it because you could not allow the device to detonate in your presence without attempting to stop it. To preserve the value of this moment, this exact moment, you in this room speaking to me. The silence stretched. Declan met her eyes. He did not have a response to this that would solve the problem of its logic. The accusation was structurally sound. It accounted for all available evidence. It was exactly the kind of possibility that needed to be sitting on the table in a room like this, in a moment like this, with stakes like these. Then you have a choice, he said. She waited. You can have me detained, Declan said. Your people can pull apart everything I've built on this station and spend the next several weeks determining whether I'm telling the truth, which I am. But you won't know that for certain until they're done. He paused. Or you can ask yourself why a man who built the device would also know exactly how to detect it before it fired, would run toward it without hesitation, would put his body between your daughter and the second blast, and whether those behaviors fit the profile of someone who wanted this outcome. He gestured at the room around them. At himself, horizontal and damaged, in an Aurelian medical chamber, on a ship that no human had ever boarded uninvited. Because if you detain me, he said, whoever actually built that bomb is currently watching from wherever they are and learning that their plan worked better than they intended. The Queen looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to her senior advisor and spoke in Aurelian. A brief exchange delivered in the flat and efficient register of decisions being made. She turned back. You will not be detained, she said. You will instead sit at my table. You will give my analysts everything they need from your records. You will tell me everything you know about who had access to your system architecture. Her eyes held his with the weight of someone extending trust as a calculated action rather than an instinct, and knowing the difference and accepting the risk anyway. And if you are lying to me, Declan Merritt, you will find that the mercy I am extending in this moment is the last mercy available to you in the known galaxy. I'm not lying, he said. No, she said quietly. I don't believe you are. She stepped back. The decision had been made. It was done. Across the chamber, Sarah exhaled, a breath she had apparently been holding for some time. Declan lay back against the medical platform and looked at the ceiling of living crystal above him, its soft light pulsing in its slow and patient rhythm. His shoulder was informing him in very clear terms that the window for ignoring it was rapidly closing. His hands, still wrapped in the alien medical mesh, had stopped hurting, which was either a very good sign or a very bad one. Outside the chamber, through the hull of the vessel, through the space between the ship and the station, the dock that had been full of ceremony was now full of investigators and debris, and the silence of an event that had not finished happening yet. Its consequences were still unfolding. They would continue unfolding for a very long time. And in a room somewhere on Apex Station, a person who had built a bomb from Declan Merritt's own code and placed it beneath a princess's feet was watching the feeds and learning that the human engineer had survived, that the queen had not retreated, that the plan had failed in every dimension that mattered. That person was, in this moment, reconsidering. And Queen Cassandra Vale, standing at the edge of the medical chamber with her daughter alive beside her, was already 3 steps ahead of whatever they were reconsidering. That was the thing about Cassandra Vale that the files had struggled to capture and that Declan Merritt was only beginning to understand. She did not react to the galaxy. She anticipated it. And somewhere in the calculation she had just made, in the risk she had just accepted, in the decision to put the man who might have tried to kill her daughter across a table from her, instead of in a cell, she had seen something that the rest of the room had not yet caught up to. The question, as Declan Merritt lay there with his broken shoulder and his borrowed time, and the weight of the Queen's decision settling over him like something between protection and sentence, was what exactly she had seen. He had a feeling he was going to find out. Part 2, a debt. The galaxy has never seen the investigation room that the Aurelian advance team had requisitioned aboard the royal vessel was not designed for human comfort, and it did not pretend to be. The table was 2 tall by 3 inches. The light ran at a frequency that sat at the edge of Declan's visual range, producing a faint and persistent pressure behind his eyes that was not quite a headache, but was clearly auditioning for the role. The chair had been sourced from somewhere in the station's administrative wing and placed in the middle of the room with the isolation of an object that did not belong in its environment and knew it. Declan sat in it and spread his system architecture files across the table's projection surface and began, methodically, to show the Aurelian analysts everything he had built. Queen Cassandra Vale sat across from him. This was not standard procedure for a monarch participating in an investigation. Declan understood this because the 3 senior advisors standing at the room's perimeter understood it and were communicating their understanding through the rigidity of people who had served long enough to know when to object and wise enough to know when not to. They stood with their concerns held perfectly still inside them and said nothing. Cassandra had not explained herself. She did not, as best Declan could tell, make a practice of explaining herself. She had simply moved to the chair across from him when the session began, and the room had adjusted to this the way rooms adjusted to weather. "Walk me through the architecture," she said, "from the beginning." "It's a monitoring framework," Declan said. "The station's original power management system was built for a human-only operational environment. When the diplomatic expansion happened 4 years ago, we needed junction monitoring that could handle the load variance from alien power systems interfacing with ours. The standard software couldn't do it, so I built something that could. From nothing. From the original schematics in about 19 months of trial and error." "Yes." She looked at the projection. Her eyes moved across the notation system with an attention that suggested she was reading it rather than simply observing it, which should not have been possible given that she had not encountered this framework before this morning. "This notation," she said, "it is yours, not adapted from an existing system." "Correct. Which means that anyone who used it to construct the detonation device either worked directly with you on its development or obtained a copy of the documentation. Or accessed my personal files on the station's internal network," Declan said. "The full documentation is stored there. It's not classified. It didn't need to be. Nobody outside of maintenance operations would have any reason to read it. Until someone did. Until someone did." Cassandra was quiet for a moment. She looked at the projection, and then she looked at Declan with the quality of attention he was beginning to recognize as her version of calculation made visible. Most people, when they were thinking through a problem, showed it in small ways. A shift in the eyes, a tension in the jaw. Cassandra showed nothing. The thinking happened behind a stillness so complete it was almost a form of camouflage. "Who had access to your personal file storage?" she asked. "Every senior staff member on the station has administrative access to the engineering department's file servers. That's about 40 people. Anyone who could get into the station's internal network could potentially reach the files if they knew where to look. But the network access logs would show it. We have requested those logs." "I know, but whoever did this has been careful. Careful people don't leave network access trails." Princess Sarah Vale entered the room quietly and took a position near the wall, not at the table, not demanding to be included. Simply present in the way of someone who had decided that presence was the form of participation available to her in this moment. She had changed from the damaged, formal attire of the docking ceremony into something simpler, and the simplicity of it made her look younger and somehow more herself. She was watching the projection of Declan's work with the same quality of attention her mother brought to it, though where Cassandra's attention was cool and systematic, Sarah's carried something more like hunger. The look of someone who finds a new language and immediately wants to know what you can say in it. "The approach protocols," Cassandra said. "The positioning of the device indicates knowledge of my daughter's designated path through Dock 7. Those protocols were finalized at 0200 station time and transmitted to the station's diplomatic coordination system." She paused. "How many people on this station received that transmission?" "Diplomatic coordination has 6 permanent staff and 3 rotating liaisons. Commander Hartwell would have received a copy as station commander. Security operations would have a copy. That's 12 people at most, under normal circumstances." Declan thought for a moment. "But the diplomatic coordination system interfaces with the station's general scheduling infrastructure. If someone with the right access wanted to pull the protocol data without going through official channels, the scheduling system would be the way to do it." "And who has access to the scheduling system?" "Senior staff, same 40 people." Cassandra placed both hands flat on the table, a gesture Declan did not know the Aurelian significance of, but felt in the room as something deliberate. "Then we are looking at an intersection," she said, "the set of people with access to your engineering files. The set of people with access to the scheduling system. The set of people with knowledge of the dock's physical architecture sufficient to select J4 as the optimal location." She looked at him steadily. "What does that intersection contain?" Declan had been running this calculation since the medical chamber. He had not wanted to arrive at its answer. "Maybe 8 people," he said. "Possibly." "Maybe 8 people," he said. "Possibly fewer." The room absorbed this. "Then we begin with 8, Cassandra said. The investigation ran for 6 hours. Declan provided everything he had. Every file, every access record he could reconstruct from his own memory of who had visited the engineering department in the past 3 months. Every anomaly in the system, behavior logs that had seemed minor at the time and looked different now through the lens of what had happened in Dock 7. He worked alongside the Aurelian analysts with the focus of a man who understood that the quality of his cooperation in this room was the only argument currently available to him for his own innocence, and invested in it accordingly. Cassandra did not leave. This surprised him as the hours accumulated. He had expected her to receive briefings, to direct the process from a remove appropriate to her position. Instead, she stayed at the table, asking precise questions, redirecting the analysis when it began to lose focus, demonstrating a technical comprehension of systems and architecture that had no obvious source in any publicly available record of her background. At the 4th hour, when the Aurelian analysts had narrowed the network access question to 3 possible intrusion vectors and were beginning to trace the path of each one, Sarah moved from the wall to the table. "I want to tell you something," she said, "that I didn't include in my initial briefing." Cassandra looked at her daughter. 3 weeks ago," Sarah said, "I received a private communication. It came through a diplomatic back channel, a secondary routing that I use for unofficial contacts. The sender was masked, but the content was a warning. It told me that my communications with the Colorado Medical Consortium had been monitored. That someone within the Aurelian diplomatic infrastructure was aware of the nature of those communications and intended to use them." The silence in the room became a different kind of silence. Cassandra's expression did not change. This was more eloquent than any expression would have been. "You did not tell me," Cassandra said. "I did not tell you," Sarah confirmed. She held her mother's gaze with the steadiness of someone who has decided that if they are going to say a hard thing, they are going to say it fully. Because the communications themselves were something I had not told you about, and I thought I could manage it. You thought you could manage it, Cassandra repeated, in a tone that contained no anger, which somehow made it worse. I was wrong. Another silence. Declan studied the projection surface with the focused attention of a man who has found himself present at a conversation that belongs entirely to two other people and is handling this by becoming temporarily very interested in engineering notation. The medical communications, Cassandra said, with the Colorado Consortium. What was the nature of them? Sarah straightened slightly. A humanitarian exchange program. Aurelian biological sciences applied to colony health infrastructure in the outer settlements. The colony networks in the asteroid belt have disease response systems that are 40 years behind current capacity. Our biological research division has solutions to problems they are still dying from. She paused. I was trying to save lives, Mother, quietly, because I knew the politics of announcing it would kill it before it began. Cassandra was quiet for a long time. Then she said, the warning communication, do you still have it? Yes. Give it to my analysts, all routing metadata, every fragment of it. Sarah nodded and moved to the analyst station. Cassandra looked at Declan. Someone within my diplomatic infrastructure, she said quietly, knew about my daughter's private communications, knew enough of today's protocols to position a device under her approach path, knew your engineering framework well enough to use it as the construction language for the detonation device. She stopped. This was not Grex Tharn. Declan looked at her. No. Tharn is capable of this kind of operation in concept. He does not have the access, the intrusion into my daughter's private channels, the knowledge of internal approach protocols finalized 8 hours before the visit. She said the next words with the flat precision of someone who has followed the logic all the way to its conclusion and is now reporting what they found there. This came from inside my house. The investigation had produced a name by the 9th hour, not through the network access logs, which were clean, as Declan had predicted, not through the engineering files, which showed access patterns consistent with normal maintenance operations. The name came through Sarah's warning communication, through the routing metadata that the Aurelian analysts unpacked layer by layer with the patient expertise of people who had spent careers learning how information tried to hide itself. The routing path, once fully reconstructed, had originated from a diplomatic terminal, one of 7 terminals assigned to the Queen's Senior Advisory Council. The anonymization was sophisticated enough that a less thorough analysis might have stopped 2 layers earlier and found nothing. The Aurelian analysts found it at the 9th layer. The name was Aldrich Vane, Senior Advisor, 15 years of service. A man who had stood in every difficult room beside Cassandra Vale for a decade and a half, who had helped navigate 3 major succession crises, who had been present at the signing of 4 treaties that reshaped territorial boundaries across the mid-sector. A man whose judgment Cassandra had consulted so often and across such a span of years that consulting him had become less a choice and more a reflex, the way the body reaches for balance without being instructed to. Cassandra sat with the name for a long time. She sat with it the way a person sits with something they have already known was coming, not surprised by its arrival, but still required to absorb the full weight of it now that it was here. 15 years. The person had served in her council for 15 years, through campaigns and crises, and the long darkness of 3 years when the empire had faced pressures that had destroyed smaller civilizations. 15 years of trust, of access, of the intimacy that forms between a leader and the people they rely on to think alongside them. Declan watched her hold it and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Sarah stood at her mother's side, close but not touching, in the way of a person who understands that sometimes the most meaningful form of presence is simply being there without demanding anything of it. Finally, Cassandra spoke, not to the room, to herself, or to the walls, or to whatever it is that rulers speak to when the thing they have to say has no appropriate audience. He told Tharn the timing, she said. Tharn provided the resources. But the plan was not Tharn's. The plan understood how I think, how I would respond, what I would do if my daughter was killed on human soil. She looked at the name on the projection. He wanted war, Not because Tharn wants war as an end, because a war between the Aurelian Empire and the human settlements would destroy everything my daughter was trying to build, everything quiet and careful and hopeful that was growing between our peoples. He wanted it burned before it could flower. She straightened. He does not know we have found him, she said. No, the lead analyst confirmed. Then he stays found and unfound, for now. She turned to Declan. What I am about to do will require the full attention of every hostile power watching this station, including Tharn. I need them watching what I say, not what I know. Declan thought he understood where this was going. He was not sure he was ready for where this was going. You're going to make the announcement, he said. Yes. About the debt, the Aurelian law. Yes. He looked at her steadily. And you want them watching your offer to me instead of watching what's happening in this room. Among other things, she said, but do not mistake the strategy for the substance, Declan Merritt. The debt is real, the law is real, what I owe you is real. She held his gaze. How I choose to honor it is a separate question. And that question I intend to ask publicly before the entire galaxy, because the answer to it will matter beyond this room, this station, this moment. She had them prepare the broadcast chamber. The announcement went out on every diplomatic channel, every military monitoring frequency, every media relay that covered Aurelian affairs, which was essentially every media relay in the known galaxy. Cassandra Vale's communications did not go unnoticed. They had not gone unnoticed in 23 years of rule, and this particular message, originating from a royal vessel docked at an American orbital station in the immediate aftermath of an assassination attempt on the heir to the Aurelian throne, was the kind of thing that stopped rooms. In alien council chambers, deliberations paused. In military command centers, officers turned from their operations to their screens. In trading hubs and border outposts and the quiet listening stations that every major power maintained in deep space, the same message arrived in the same moment, translated instantly into 100 languages, and the response was the same in all of them. Silence, and then the rapid, complicated noise of an entire galaxy beginning to recalculate. Cassandra spoke for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. She described, with the precision that was her defining characteristic, what had occurred in Dock 7. She described Declan's actions without embellishment or sentiment, in the plain language of a person reporting a fact. She invoked the Aurelian law of royal debt, a law older than any currently existing human institution, a law that the galaxy recognized not because it was ancient, but because it had never in the history of its application been invoked lightly. She offered Declan Merritt a place within her house as chosen kin. Protection, status, the full weight of Aurelian authority behind the continuation of his life and the futures of those connected to him. And then she stopped speaking, and the galaxy waited. In the broadcast chamber, with the transmission still live, with the weight of 1 billion simultaneous listeners pressing against the moment from every direction, Declan sat across from the Queen of the Aurelian Empire and looked at her and thought about what it meant to say no to a person like this in a moment like this. He thought about it for a long time. Cassandra waited. He was beginning to understand the capacity to wait with the same intensity that other people brought to action. The waiting was not passive. It was a form of pressure, applied with perfect control, and it was extraordinary. No, Declan said. The word fell into the silence of the broadcast chamber and kept falling. He had expected something to happen. Some shift in the room, some response from the advisors at the perimeter, some change in the atmosphere that would indicate the galaxy receiving what he had just said and beginning to process it. What he had not expected was Cassandra's expression. She looked, for the fraction of a second that her discipline allowed it, genuinely surprised. Not offended, not angry, surprised. The way a person looks when the world does something they had modeled every possibility for and somehow missed this one. No, he said again because it deserved to be said twice. Not because I don't understand what you're offering. I understand exactly what you're offering. Humanity under the protection of the Aurelian Empire would be safer tomorrow than it was yesterday. That's real, and I understand it. He paused. But safety that comes from belonging to someone is a different thing than safety that comes from being someone. And my people have spent the last 17 years learning the difference. The silence stretched. "What would you have instead?" Cassandra said, quietly enough that it was almost not a question. "A seat," Declan said, "for humanity, at your council table, not as guests, not as protected parties, as equals." He held her gaze, because this was the kind of statement that required the physical commitment of eye contact to be fully real. "We're not subjects looking for a better emperor. We're a species that is still figuring out what it is. Let us figure it out alongside you, not underneath you." The broadcast chamber was very quiet. Cassandra looked at him for a long time. The looking had a quality to it that felt like something being measured. Not him, specifically. Something that he represented. Some calculation that had been running in the background of her thinking since the medical chamber, or perhaps since the dock, or perhaps since before she had ever boarded the vessel to come to the station, and that his words had just provided the final variable for. She turned to the live transmission. "Let it be heard," she said, "that the offer of personal bond is set aside by the choice of the human himself, and in its place by the same law of debt, and by my own judgment as Queen of the Aurelian Empire, I grant to humanity a permanent seat at Aurelian Strategic Council proceedings, not as subjects, not as vassals." She paused, and the pause contained the weight of something being said for the first time in history. "As equals." The galaxy exploded. Declan heard it happen in real time, in the way that the station's communication systems began to register traffic at volumes that made the normal diplomatic monitoring frequencies sound like standing in the middle of a waterfall. The advisors at the perimeter of the room were receiving their own feeds, and their expressions, uniformly disciplined until this moment, were now displaying the strain of people managing their responses to information that was difficult to manage. In the corner of his vision, Declan saw Sarah. She was not looking at the transmission screens. She was looking at her mother, with an expression that contained something complicated and layered, and deeply, quietly moved. Warlord Grex Tharn's response arrived 27 minutes later. Not a message, a military movement. 3 coalition fleets, drawing from the combined resources of 6 powers that had been waiting for precisely this kind of provocation, began advancing toward the orbital territories above the American continent. The message that accompanied the movement was short, a single phrase transmitted on open frequency. "This is not recognized." Commander Brixton Hartwell's voice came through the station communications system with the flatness of a person delivering information they wish they were not delivering. "Queen Cassandra, we are tracking 3 coalition fleet formations on approach vectors, estimated contact range in 14 hours. Cassandra received this information without any visible response. She looked at Declan. 14 hours, she said. "Yes. You have 14 hours to show me what you told me. That humans survive by thinking rather than fighting." Her voice was level, not a challenge, a statement of condition. "The weather," reported accurately. "I want to know what that looks like in practical terms." Declan looked at the movement projections appearing on the room's tactical display. 3 fleet formations. The combined firepower represented was not something that any existing human military infrastructure could meaningfully engage. This was not a fight. This was a demonstration, and everyone in the room understood what was being demonstrated. He thought about 14 hours. He thought about what he knew about Apex Station's civilian infrastructure, about the commercial shipping corridors that crisscrossed the space above the American continent, about the relay systems that he had personally helped design and install over 5 years, about the asteroid belt colony networks that Sarah had been quietly building medical relationships with for the past 6 months. He thought about the underestimated power of things that were built to be unremarkable. "I need communications access to the station's civilian infrastructure management system," he said, "and I need Commander Hartwell." "You have both," Cassandra said. He stood up. His shoulder reminded him of its ongoing objection to all of this. He noted it, filed it, and moved toward the communications terminal. Cassandra watched him go. Then she looked at Sarah, who was still watching her with that complicated and layered expression. "You saved lives," Cassandra said quietly. "Your medical program, before it was anything official or recognized, you were already saving lives." Sarah said nothing. She waited. "I am not angry," Cassandra said, which from her was not a simple statement. It was a reckoning, an acknowledgement that the silence between them had cost something, and that the cost was being recorded accurately, and that the accounting of it would continue. I am not angry, and I should have listened sooner, and we will speak about this properly when there are not three hostile fleets on an approach vector. Sarah exhaled, just once, just briefly, the exhale of someone who has been holding their breath for much longer than the immediate moment required. Yes, she said, when there are not three hostile fleets. Cassandra turned back to the tactical display. She watched Tharn's formations advancing across the projection in their slow and certain lines. She watched the distance between them and Apex Station diminishing in real time, measured in increments that felt like the ticking of something very large and very final. She had let the galaxy see her offer. She had let it see the refusal. She had let it see the counterproposal and her acceptance of it. She had broadcast all of this because she needed Tharn and his allies looking at what she was doing openly, processing the provocation, responding to the obvious. What she had not broadcast was what she knew about Aldrich Vane. That information was hers. It sat inside her like a key, cold and precise, waiting for the right door. 14 hours, she thought. She had managed empires on less. She turned from the display and began to prepare. Part 3, the cornerstone. The broadcast went out at 0300 station time, and it was a lie, a precise lie, a lie constructed with the same care that Cassandra Vale brought to everything, which meant that its architecture was so sound and its surface so convincing that even the people in the room with her who knew it was a lie felt the pull of it. She sat before the transmission array in the broadcast chamber, and she looked into the relay lens, and she spoke in the measured and formal register of a ruler delivering difficult news. The offer, she said, was suspended. The circumstances of the past 12 hours had introduced complexities that required further evaluation. The question of human representation at Aurelian Council proceedings was not a decision to be made under duress, in the shadow of a military provocation. She was withdrawing the announcement pending a full review. She would be consulting with her council. She would be returning to Aurelian territory within 48 hours. She said this with complete conviction, which was the only way she knew how to say anything. She closed the transmission. The room was quiet for a moment. Declan looked at her from across the table. He had been told what she was going to say. He had understood the reasoning when she explained it to him 2 hours ago, working through the logic together in the low light of the early station morning, while Sarah slept in the adjoining chamber, and the tactical display showed Tharn's fleets continuing their slow advance. He had understood it then, and he understood it now. And he still felt the discomfort of watching a thing said that was not true, even when the truth of the strategy behind it was beyond question. He'll move, Declan said, when he sees that. Yes, Cassandra said. He will believe he has won something, that the pressure worked, that I am retreating. She stood, smoothing the front of her robe with a gesture that seemed automatic, the motion of a person returning to themselves after a performance. A man who believes he has won becomes careless about what he does next. He begins to confirm rather than conceal. He reaches out to those he has been coordinating with, to share the victory, to arrange the next phase. She looked at Declan steadily. And we will be watching every channel he touches. And Tharn? Tharn will slow his advance, not stop it. He is not capable of walking away from a position of strength without extracting something from it. But he will slow because a slow advance is leverage and a fast one is a commitment, and Tharn is too experienced to commit to something he has not finished calculating. She moved toward the tactical display. That gives us time. How much time? Enough, she said, if your people do what you told me they would do. Declan had spent the 11 hours between Cassandra's council decision and this moment doing what he had spent the last 19 years of his life doing. Finding the things that were about to break and rerouting the load before they broke. Except that the load, this time, was not plasma conduit pressure in a secondary grid. The load was the combined military attention of 6 hostile powers being directed at a single point in space. The principle was the same. You did not put yourself between a force and its destination. You moved the destination. Commander Brixton Hartwell had not slept. This was visible in the economy of her movements, the way fatigue refined a person down to their essential competencies and stripped away everything peripheral. She stood at the civilian infrastructure management console with Declan and worked through the logistics of what he was asking with the speed of someone who had been running contingency calculations since the first fleet movement appeared on her screens 14 hours ago. The commercial corridor network above the continental shelf, Declan said, pulling up the routing map. These 18 relay nodes, their civilian infrastructure, shipping management, atmospheric monitoring, satellite communication handoffs. Nothing military about any of them. Correct, Brixton said, but each one of them carries the station's position transponder signal as part of the standard navigation broadcast. The shipping lanes use our position data to calculate approach vectors. Menton, he pulled the schematic forward. If we adjust the transponder output from these 18 nodes simultaneously, we can create a position broadcast that places Apex Station at a coordinate that is 40 degrees off our actual orbital position. Brixton looked at the schematic for a moment. The station doesn't move. No, the station doesn't move. The signal does. Everything looking at us from outside the immediate vicinity sees a position that isn't where we are. Targeting systems, approach vectors, weapons lock calculations, everything that needs to know where we are to do something to us gets told the wrong place. For how long? As long as we need it. The relay nodes are civilian infrastructure. Their classification puts them completely outside every military detection protocol currently in use by Aurelian or coalition monitoring systems. Nobody scans commercial shipping nodes for weapons activity because commercial shipping nodes are not weapons. He paused. Until they are. And the adjustment runs on my own system architecture, which means I can modify the transponder output remotely through maintenance channels without triggering a single defensive action flag. Brixton was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the relay map with the expression of a person discovering that a tool they have been using for one purpose has always been capable of something else entirely. The station population, she said, 2,400 people. Who are all alive right now? Declan said, and will stay that way. She nodded once. Do it. He did it. The adjustment took 40 minutes to propagate through all 18 nodes. During those 40 minutes, Declan did not look at the tactical display showing Tharn's fleet positions. He looked at his console and he worked, because looking at the tactical display would not change what the tactical display showed, and working would. At 0517 station time, the civilian relay network above the American continental shelf began broadcasting Apex Station's position as a coordinate 40 degrees from its actual orbital location. The adjustment was subtle. It was not the kind of thing that announced itself. It was the kind of thing that sat quietly inside the infrastructure and did its work without requiring anyone to notice it. Across the station, civilian operations continued. The 2,400 people who lived and worked on Apex Station went about the business of living and working on a station that had just survived an explosion, was currently hosting an alien queen, and had 3 hostile fleet formations on approach. They did this with the resilience of people who had signed up to live 400 kilometers above the Earth and understood that the baseline conditions of their existence included things that most people would find unreasonable. In the Broadcast Monitoring Center, Cassandra's analysts watched the communication patterns of Aldrich Vane. He moved at 0531 station time. Not overtly, not in any channel that would register as significant to a casual observer. He used a diplomatic back channel, the same category of routing that Sarah had used for her medical consortium communications. And he sent a message to an address that the analysts traced in 11 minutes to a relay station associated with Tharn's advanced communication network. The message was short. She is retreating. Proceed to phase 2. Cassandra read it and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, convene the emergency council, full broadcast. Every diplomatic channel, every military monitoring frequency. I want every empire that has been watching this situation in the room when this happens. Phase 2 of whatever plan Tharn and Aldrich Vane had constructed turned out to be a simultaneous strike order issued to all 3 fleet formations at 0614 station time. The strike was not subtle. It was not designed to be. It was designed to be visible, conclusive, and fast. 3 fleet formations converging on a single coordinate from 3 vectors. Their weapon systems already locked and their approach calculated to deliver overlapping fire at a target that had no meaningful defensive capability. The coordinate they converged on was 40 degrees away from where Apex Station actually was. They fired into empty space. The weapon's discharge was extraordinary, visible to the naked eye from the surface of Colorado as a brief and violent aurora across the upper atmosphere, the light produced by the interaction of directed energy weapons with the electromagnetic field of a planet that had no idea it was being shot at and was entirely unharmed by the experience. Later, the recordings would be described as beautiful by people watching from the surface who did not yet know what they were seeing. Three distinct patterns of light, moving in from different directions, converging on a point in space that contained nothing. In the tactical monitoring center of the royal vessel, Declan watched the strike projections resolve into their actual impacts and felt something move through him that was not quite triumph and was not quite relief, but lived in the neighborhood of both. The fleets had fired, the station was intact, and the entire galaxy had just watched 6 Allied powers discharge their military assets against a coordinate that contained nothing but the slowly dispersing memory of where someone had thought something was. That, Brixton Hartwell said from beside him, in the tone of a person who has just witnessed something that will require extensive paperwork and would very much like a moment to simply appreciate it first, is going to be in the history books. Declan looked at the empty space where the weapons fire had gone and thought about 19 years of being the person nobody noticed, building systems that nobody thought about, understanding things that nobody else bothered to understand. "Tell the colony network relays to drop the transponder adjustment," he said. "Let them see where we actually are." The adjustment dropped at 0631 station time. Apex Station reappeared on every tracking system in the region with the calm quality of something that had never actually left, simply been elsewhere, in a way that had taken everyone a moment to catch up to. In the emergency council chamber aboard the royal vessel, Cassandra Vale stood before a full diplomatic transmission array connected to representatives from 47 recognized governments, empires, and autonomous territories. She had been waiting for this moment with the patience of someone who had prepared for it carefully and understood that patience was not the absence of urgency, but the discipline to use urgency at precisely the right moment. She had allowed herself one small satisfaction when the strike projections showed the weapons fire resolving into empty space. One moment of something that might, in a person with fewer years of practice at stillness, have been allowed to reach her face. She had not allowed it to reach her face, but it had been there, warm and precise, in the space between what she felt and what she showed. Now she had work to do. The council chamber filled with the faces and representatives of the galaxy's powers. Some in person, most by transmission, all of them carrying the expression of people who had just watched 3 fleet formations fire their weapons into empty space and were still in the process of deciding what to do with that information. She let them look at each other for a moment. Then she said, "Bring him in." Aldrich Vane walked into the chamber with the bearing of someone who did not yet understand what kind of room he was walking into. He had received a summons, formal and standard, requesting his presence at an emergency session. He had come because refusing a summons from the Queen was not a thing a council member did, and because he believed, having sent his message to Tharn's network and having watched Cassandra's broadcast announcing her retreat, that this session was what it appeared to be. An emergency consultation, his attendance expected and unremarkable. He saw the transmission array. He saw the 47 diplomatic representatives. He saw Cassandra's expression, and in her expression he found nothing at all, because she had arranged her face into the precise stillness of a wall, and what was behind the wall he only understood when she began to speak. She spoke for 8 minutes. She laid out the routing path from his terminal to Tharn's network, layer by layer, with the same methodical precision her analysts had used to reconstruct it. She showed the access logs, recovered not from the clean network records he had carefully sanitized, but from the physical hardware logs that most sophisticated users forgot existed. The records burned directly into the relay equipment's operational memory rather than the software logs that could be adjusted. She showed the timing of the access against the finalization of Sarah's approach protocols. She showed the detonation code's architecture matched against Declan's engineering framework documentation, accessed from a terminal in the Council Advisory Suite at 0347 on the morning of the visit. She showed all of it to 47 diplomatic representatives simultaneously, on full broadcast in real time, with a thoroughness that left no space for alternative interpretations. Aldrich Vane stood without speaking. Cassandra had expected defiance. She had prepared for it. She had prepared for several possible responses, and had answers ready for each of them, because that was what she did. Instead, she got something quieter and in its own way, more complete. He said, "I did it to protect the Empire." The chamber absorbed this. "You will explain that," Cassandra said. He looked at her, 15 years of service, 15 years of standing in difficult rooms together. The look between them carried all of it and moved through it and arrived somewhere beyond it. "Humanity," he said, "is chaos. They are young and they are emotional, and they adapt in ways that cannot be predicted or controlled. A permanent seat at your council means a permanent source of instability in every decision your empire makes for the next century. They will not follow the rules of the galaxy because they do not understand them. They will break alliances by accident. They will create crises through sentiment." He paused. "The medical program the princess was building. Do you know where it leads? In 20 years, the outer colony networks are fully integrated with Aurelian biological infrastructure. In 50 years, the dependency flows in both directions. In a century, the distinction between human settlement and Aurelian territory becomes academic. We lose the border. We lose the definition." His voice held no anger, only the terrible clarity of a man who had followed his conviction all the way to its end. "I was protecting what we are." The chamber was silent. Cassandra looked at him for a long time. "You decided this for me," she said. He said nothing. "You looked at my judgment," she said, "at a decision I made, a council seat I offered, a relationship between our peoples that my daughter built with her own care and her own intelligence. And you decided that your assessment of its consequences was more important than my authority to make it." She paused. "You did not bring me your concerns. You did not argue your case. You built a bomb from the code of a man who had done nothing to deserve it, and you put it under my daughter's feet." The silence in the chamber was total. "My daughter," Cassandra said, "who was trying to save lives." She turned from him. "Remove him," she said. The security personnel who had been standing at the perimeter of the chamber, whose presence Vane had registered and misread as ceremonial, moved forward. As he was escorted from the chamber, Cassandra looked at the 47 diplomatic representatives looking back at her. She looked at them the way she had looked at every difficult room she had ever stood in, with the full weight of what she was. "Let it be recorded," she said, "that this council witnessed the identification and removal of the party responsible for the attack on Princess Sarah Vale. Let it be recorded that the party operated in coordination with military assets belonging to the coalition forces currently in retreat from unauthorized approach vectors." She turned slightly to look at the feed showing the Tharnfleet formations, which had in fact begun to slow and separate in the minutes since the empty space strike. The coherence of a coordinated military action dissolving as its command structure absorbed the information that its central intelligence contact had just been arrested on full galactic broadcast. "Let it be recorded that the Aurelian Empire does not manage its failures privately. We make them visible. We account for them completely, and we move forward." She let the silence following this settle and hold. Then she said something that had not been in any plan, something that arrived from the place beneath strategy, beneath calculation, beneath the 23 years of practiced authority that had made her what she was. "Let it also be recorded," she said quietly, "that my daughter was right." Sarah, standing at the edge of the chamber, went very still. "The medical program," Cassandra said, "the communications with the Colorado Consortium, the quiet and careful work of building something real between our peoples before the politics of it could kill it." She looked at her daughter. "She was right, and I should have been the one who built it alongside her instead of the galaxy being in this room today because someone else decided to burn it down." She held Sarah's gaze for a moment. "That is also the record I want this council to carry." The Tharn Coalition's ceasefire request arrived at 0814 station time. It was not a graceful document. It had the quality of something assembled quickly by people who needed to stop the current situation before it produced further consequences, which was an accurate description of what it was. The political cover it attempted to construct around the fleet movements, reframing them as a routine exercise that had concluded on schedule, was not convincing to anyone reading it who had spent the past 9 hours watching what had actually happened. Declan read it in the monitoring center and thought about the word routine. Brixton Hartwell signed in the acknowledgement of receipt with the expression of a person who has decided to let the document's own implausibility do the work of responding to it. Then she set the tablet down, looked out the monitoring center's viewport at the stars where the fleet formations had been, and said nothing for a moment. 5 years you've been on this station, she said finally. It was not quite a question. Yes, Declan said. And in 5 years you built a civilian relay network that just turned three of the most powerful fleet formations in the galaxy into a very expensive light show over Colorado. The network was already built, Declan said. I just adjusted what it was saying. Brixton looked at him with the assessment of a person who has commanded difficult postings long enough to recognize when someone is being deliberately modest and has decided to let them have it. Get some sleep, she said. When you wake up, we're going to have a very long conversation about expanding the relay architecture to the outer belt. By 0900, the three fleet formations had reversed their approach vectors. By 1100, they were beyond the boundary of disputed space. By early afternoon station time, the space above Colorado was quiet again, carrying nothing but the ordinary traffic of commercial shipping and the slow orbit of satellites that had been there long before any of this and would be there long after. Declan sat in the Civilian Infrastructure Management Center and looked at the relay map showing 18 nodes broadcasting position data that was accurate again, ordinary again, unremarkable again. He looked at it for a long time. His shoulder had been properly treated by the Aurelian medical systems sometime around 0400, while he was in the middle of the transponder recalibration work and had waved off the medical attendant twice before Sarah had appeared in the doorway of the monitoring center and looked at him with the expression of a person who has survived an explosion and is not interested in watching someone ignore a medical situation on grounds of inconvenience. He had let the attendant treat it after that. It still hurt. It would hurt for a while. He had been told 6 to 8 weeks for full function, which was, given the quality of Aurelian medical technology, approximately half the time the same injury would have taken under human care. He thought about that, about the medical exchange program that Sarah had been quietly building, about what 6 weeks versus 12 weeks meant to a person in a colony settlement in the asteroid belt with limited medical infrastructure in a treatable condition. He thought about what ordinary things could do when they were allowed to do them. Commander Hartwell appeared in the doorway. The Queen is asking for you, she said. Observation deck, upper level. The observation deck on Apex Station's upper level was the only place on the station where the view was unobstructed in all directions. No docking arms, no antenna arrays, no structural elements interrupting the glass. Just the curve of the Earth below, enormous and blue and carrying its long history without any visible awareness of what had been happening above it, and the stars beyond, clear and permanent. Cassandra was already there when Declan arrived. She stood at the viewport with her hands clasped behind her back and looked at the planet below with the expression of someone who has put down something very heavy and is taking a moment before deciding what to pick up next. She heard him come in and did not turn immediately, which he understood was not rudeness, but the completion of a private moment she was not willing to cut short for protocol. He stopped a few feet from her and looked at the Earth too. It was, he thought, still extraordinary. Even after 5 years of seeing it from up here every day, it was still the kind of thing that reached through whatever mood you were carrying and replaced it briefly with something quieter. The scale of it, the color, the slow turn of weather systems over the Pacific that looked, from this distance, like something breathing. It's a remarkable world, Cassandra said, not to open a conversation, simply as a fact offered to the room. Yes, Declan said. She turned then. She looked at him with the steady assessment that he had come to recognize as her baseline, the constant evaluation running beneath whatever the surface of any given moment held. He had stopped finding it unsettling somewhere around the 4th hour of the investigation. Now it simply felt like being in the presence of a person who paid attention, which was, in his experience, rarer than it should have been. You could have left, she said, when the first anomaly reading came. You could have reported it through proper channels and waited for the security response. Yes, but why didn't you? He thought about this honestly because she was asking honestly and she would know the difference. Because proper channels take time, he said, and I knew what the reading meant. And I had already decided somewhere in the 5 years of building those systems and knowing how they could fail, that if the moment ever came where I was the person who knew and everyone else didn't, I wasn't going to spend it following a procedure. He paused. My father was a firefighter. He told me once that the difference between the people who ran toward things and the people who ran away wasn't courage exactly. It was just that they had decided in advance what they would do, so the decision wasn't actually made in the moment. Cassandra looked at him for a long time. "You decided in advance," she said, "a long time ago, before I knew there would ever be anything like this to run toward." She turned back to the viewport. Colorado was passing beneath them, the Rockies visible as a dark spine running through the tan and green of the continent below. Somewhere down there, people were going about their Tuesday with no particular awareness that the political architecture of the galaxy had spent the past 20 hours being taken apart and reassembled above their heads. "The council seat is not suspended," Cassandra said. "I want that clear. The broadcast was a tactic. The offer is real and it stands." "I know," Declan said. "You will represent your people's interests at Aurelian Strategic Council proceedings. You personally as the first designated human representative until such time as a formal selection process can be established between our governments." She looked at him. "This will not be comfortable work. The council has 40 years of established process that was not designed with human participation in mind. There will be those who treat the seat as symbolic, who expect you to be present without being consequential." "I've been doing that job my entire career," Declan said, "being present without being noticed. I'm good at it." Something moved at the corner of Cassandra's expression. Not quite a smile. The territory just before the border, the place where a smile begins before a person who has practiced stillness for 23 years decides whether to let it arrive. "I have one more matter," she said. She reached into the fold of her robe and produced a small device, a projection unit, which she activated. A hologram formed between them, small and precise, showing a schematic that Declan recognized after a moment as a structural diagram. A station, orbital, larger than Apex Station. The architecture was Aurelian, but the positioning, the specific orbital coordinates annotated in the corner of the projection, was Earth-adjacent, high orbit above the American continent. "The Aurelian Neutral Arbitration Council," Cassandra said. "The body responsible for mediating disputes between recognized galactic powers. It has been housed in Aurelian territory for 300 years. She looked at him. "I am moving it." Declan looked at the schematic, at the orbital coordinates. He did not speak immediately because the thing she was saying was large enough that it required a moment of honest reckoning with its size before any response to it could be proportional. "Here," he said, "above your continent, in the jurisdiction of your station network, operated jointly by Aurelian and human administrative staff, under a charter that will require revision to accommodate the partnership." She deactivated the projection. "Earth will become the location where the galaxy chooses to resolve its conflicts. Not by conquest, not by proximity to any single power. Because the species that lives here has demonstrated, in the past 20 hours, that they understand something about staying alive in impossible situations that the rest of the galaxy tends to forget." "What's that?" Declan asked. "That endurance is not the absence of strength," she said. "It is the most disciplined form of it." The door to the observation deck opened quietly. Sarah entered, moving on 30 hours without sleep, and running on the forward momentum of someone for whom the thing they are doing has finally become fully, completely real. She was carrying a data tablet, and she looked at both of them without preamble, the way a person looks at people they have stopped performing for. "The Colorado Consortium confirmed a receipt," she said. "The first formal exchange under the medical program. Vaccine synthesis protocols, 3 compounds, transferred to the Colony Network medical databases as of 40 minutes ago." She looked up from the tablet. "The Outer Belt settlements will have access to Aurelian standard treatment for those 3 conditions within the week." She looked at her mother. Cassandra held her daughter's gaze for a moment. Between them passed something that did not require language, that had in fact been waiting for years for the right moment to be exchanged, and had found it here above Colorado, with the Earth turning slowly beneath them and the galaxy rearranging itself in the space outside the glass. "Well done," Cassandra said. 2 words, quietly delivered, carrying the full weight of what they cost from a woman who did not expend things carelessly. Sarah nodded once. She looked at the Earth for a moment. Then she looked at Declan. "They're still going to test us," she said. "Tharn isn't finished. The Council will have factions that oppose the human seat. The arbitration center will take years to establish properly. Yes, Declan said. You understand what you're agreeing to. I understand what I agreed to the moment I ran toward Dock 7. He looked at the planet below. Everything since then has been consequences. Consequences are manageable. But Sarah looked at him with the bright and searching attention that was most essentially herself and said, that is either the most reassuring thing anyone has ever said or the most reckless. I cannot determine which. Probably both, Declan said. Cassandra looked at them both, her daughter and this human who had refused a crown and asked for a chair instead, and said, then we are agreed, all of us. It was, Declan thought, the closest thing to warmth he had heard in her voice since the moment in the medical chamber when she had told him she did not believe he was lying. Coming from Cassandra Vale, it was considerable. 6 months later, the first transport carrying Aurelian diplomatic staff for the advanced construction team of the new Arbitration Council facility arrived in Earth orbit at 1400 Eastern Time on a Thursday afternoon. It was a clear day above Colorado. The Rockies were visible from space, running their dark line through the continent the way they had for 100 million years, unmoved by the passage of events above them. Declan Merritt stood at the viewport of Apex Station's upper observation deck and watched the transport settle into its approach vector. His shoulder had healed in 7 weeks. The Aurelian medical assessment had said 6 to 8. He had characteristically split the difference. On level 3, in the engineering bay that had been expanded 4 months ago to accommodate the specifications of the new arbitration wing, Commander Brixton Hartwell was reviewing structural load calculations with a team that now included 3 Aurelian engineers and 2 human ones, and was doing so with the expression of a person who had walked into every difficult room her career had ever placed in front of her, and had not yet found one that folded her. The expanded relay architecture she and Declan had designed for the outer belt was 6 weeks from full deployment. She had already started the specifications for the next phase. In the medical coordination office, 1 level below, Sarah Vale was on a live call with the Colorado Consortium. The second compound transfer was 2 days out. The third was in final review. She had, in the past 6 months, also opened preliminary conversations with 2 other alien medical research bodies whose work had potential applications for human colony health. She had told her mother about both conversations. Her mother had asked 3 questions, listened to the answers, and told her to proceed. It was, Sarah had reflected afterward, the most straightforward approval she had ever received for anything, and it had cost her nothing except honesty. She was still adjusting to that. Cassandra Vale's voice came through the communication unit at Declan's wrist, brief and without preamble, the way she communicated when the content was sufficient and ceremony was not required. They will not make this easy for you, she said. I know, Declan said. They will test every decision. They will look for inconsistency. They will treat the first human representative at our council as an experiment that they expect to fail. I know. And you are not concerned. He watched the transport descend toward the station's expanded docking wing, built in the past 3 months to accommodate the traffic that the new arrangement was already generating. 6 bays where there had been 3. A new environmental management system he had designed from scratch, because the old one was not built for this volume of alien atmospheric requirements, and building things from scratch was what he did. I'm always concerned, he said. Being concerned is what keeps the systems running. A pause, then Cassandra said, with the quality of someone reporting an observation arrived at through careful examination of evidence. You are not what the galaxy expected, Declan Merritt. No, he said. We rarely are. A shorter pause. Neither, she said. The transport completed its docking at 14:23 station time. The first Aurelian administrative staff walked onto Apex Station through a connector built by human hands from human materials to interface precisely with Aurelian boarding systems, because someone had spent 4 months making sure the junction worked before it was needed. Declan turned from the viewport. He had work to do. Below him, the Earth continued its turn, patient and enormous, carrying its 2,000 years of recorded human history and its 17 years of galactic contact and its uncountable ordinary lives toward whatever came next. The Rockies held their line through the continent. The weather moved across the Pacific in its slow and breathing patterns. The stars above it all burned with the same cold permanence they had brought to every morning and every catastrophe and every quiet moment of consequence that had ever happened beneath them. They did not quicken for any of it. They never had. But in the medical coordination office on level 4, Sarah Vale was finishing a call that would send medicine to people who needed it. In the engineering bay on level 3, Brixton Hartwell was building infrastructure for a future that did not exist yet, and was doing so with the focus of someone who intended it to. In the docking wing below, two species who had spent 17 years deciding whether to trust each other were beginning, in the ordinary and unglamorous way of things that are actually going to last, to work. That was how it had always begun. Not with declarations made in the full sight of the galaxy, not with weapons fired and ceasefire documents signed, not with the grand and visible moments that made it into the history transmissions, with people who had decided in advance what they would do when the moment came, and then did it.